Safe Havens, and it's nice to have you with us today. I want to start by saying that we all know, certainly at Safe Havens, we know that not all survivors of abuse are faith-affiliated, but for those who are faith-affiliated, faith can be central to their identity, their decision-making, and their healing. And of course, there's a tremendous diversity of faith and culture across the U.S., and advocates are called upon to provide services to survivors across these many faiths and cultures. So to help you all build capacity to serve survivors from many backgrounds, we've put together a series of 8 webinars that look at abuse through the lens of various religious and cultural traditions. Today's webinar is the second in the series, and if you missed the first, no worries, because it's been recorded, and it will be posted on the Safe Havens website at www.interfaithpartners.org very soon. Upcoming webinars look at abuse through the lenses of Islam and Christianity. We're looking at African American and Latina communities specifically, and we'll also explore issues that are special to victims of clergy abuse and elder abuse. So the complete webinar schedule is at the end of today's presentation. Today we're exploring abuse through the lens of Judaism, and we have a world-class expert from Jewish Women International here to guide us. It's a tremendous honor to introduce Deborah Rosenbloom to you. Deborah oversees Jewish Women International's portfolio of anti-violence initiatives and prevention programs, which focus on engaging faith communities as allies. Deborah staffs JWI's Jewish Clergy Task Force, as well as JWI's Interfaith Coalition on Domestic and Sexual Abuse. She edited their Rethinking Guides on Women Relationships and Jewish Texts, and is now directing JWI's OVW-funded initiative on engaging men and boys, which is called Boys to Mention. Deborah is herself a member of the modern Orthodox Jewish community. Safe Havens has partnered with JWI in many ways over many years. JWI is a national leader in the work at the intersection of faith and abuse, and Deborah's expertise is unquestioned. And so we are deeply grateful that she's agreed to present today's webinar. And Deborah, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Should I?
Oh, yes, just advance.
Okay. Thank you. I want to start by thanking Safe Havens for including Jewish Women International in this effort to increase the ability of the field to serve victims of faith. JWI and Safe Havens have worked together for years, recognizing the significant ways that faith can be both a resource and a barrier for women experiencing intimate partner violence. Today, I'm going to be discussing the idiosyncratic nature of Jewish identity, explore the demographics of the U.S. Jewish population, its community structures, and family life, and then move on to dynamics of domestic abuse in the Jewish community, barriers to seeking help, and some challenges for advocates. I hope this provides you with new understandings and helps you build and strengthen your relationships with the community, enabling you to better serve these clients. As Anne-Marie said so graciously, Jewish Women International has been working in the field around faith and supporting victims of faith for many, many years. We are a progressive Jewish women's organization, and our larger goal is to address gender-based violence and ultimately to end it. We serve on the steering committee of the National Task Force to End Domestic and Sexual Violence and advocate on Capitol Hill around VAWA, FIPSA, and other legislation supporting victims and women. We work within the Jewish community, the interfaith community, and secular communities, providing resources and training across the board. And we've recently been awarded our second OVW Engaging Men grants. Our first one, Boys to Mensch, was a 3-year project that ended last year, and the work was to promote positive masculinity within the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community in Baltimore. And we did that through a large public awareness campaign, workshops for boys in the most right-wing conservative schools there, community forums for adult men, and other means. And we're hoping now to be able to bring that to other Orthodox communities around the country. The second grant that we just were awarded is to work with Jewish men in fraternity life on 2 campuses and connect them with the resources and the training and provide training to them, again, to promote positive masculinity. In 2008, we founded and now we convene the Interfaith Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, which is a group of about 40 different faith groups, of which Safe Havens has been a member since the beginning, working on legislation, anti-violence legislation. And it's really one of our signature projects and one that I'm most proud of being part of, because I truly believe that as a faith community, as an interfaith community, we are stronger and we are better able to serve the people who most need our services. We also lead the Clergy Task Force on Domestic Abuse in the Jewish Community, which is a group of rabbis and cantors providing resources and training to their peers and colleagues in congregations, in schools, and chaplaincies across the country. So I think we're doing a poll. Yes, okay, great. So if everyone could just take a quick second and tell us who you are, that would be wonderful. Looks like a lot of you are advocates. Give it one more second. Okay, so I guess we'll end the poll, but it looks like the majority of you are advocates serving directly in the field, a few social workers, and I'm guessing there are other professions out there, but maybe not everybody answered the poll. So let's go on to the next one, which is asking, do you now or have you ever served Jewish victims? I'm really trying to get a handle on, what your familiarity is with Jewish victims. Do you know the Jewish clergy in your community? And do you have a relationship with other parts of the Jewish community? It looks like some of you are either now or have served Jewish victims. Most of you don't know the Jewish clergy in your community, and we'll talk about that, and don't have a relationship with other parts of the Jewish community. Okay, that's great, because that means that this webinar, should build your skills and enable you to then go forth and get to know the Jewish clergy in your community and build those relationships with other parts of the Jewish community, so that when you do have, or when you are asked to serve a Jewish victim, you'll be better equipped to do that. So I think we'll close that poll. Okay. So the first question we're going to address is, what is a Jew? Who is a Jew? And it should be a simple question, but it's kind of complicated. And then what does being Jewish mean in America today? And there are a lot of myths and stereotypes around this. So I'm just going to get right to it. And what I really want to stress is that the Jewish community is not monolithic. It's incredibly diverse. And it's people, we'll talk about the diversity and the demographics, but there's no central theme to being a Jew, except to say that it's a monotheistic religion with certain core historical experiences that affect all Jews. And when I started doing the research, I know that most Jews are secular, actually. Secularism has a long tradition in Jewish life in America. And Jews tend to be actually less religious than the U.S. public as a whole. Jews attend fewer religious services weekly, don't necessarily believe in God at all, but while they don't attach high importance to religion, being Jewish is very important to them. And most Jews say that being Jewish is mainly a matter of ancestry and culture. In other words, who are your parents, who are your grandparents, and what pieces of the Jewish culture do you bring into your own personal life? And this is really important, I think, for advocates to know, because sometimes it feels like a barrier, like, oh my gosh, she's Jewish, she's going to be so religious, I don't have kosher food, I don't know what the Sabbath is for this person. But I want to break down that barrier, because often it's less a question of religious observance and more a question of the kind of cultural things that Jews share, and also to understand that even if a Jewish victim does not identify as being religious or observant, her culture will likely be important to her, and her sources of support may very well come from the Jewish community. So it's important to be familiar with that community. Most Jews say that remembering the Holocaust, which decimated a third of the Jewish population worldwide, and leading an ethical life are essential to their sense of Jewishness. More than half of Jews say that working for justice and equality is also essential. And you'll find so many Jews who aren't observant at all, but believe that social justice is critical, and that comes from their own sense of to be a Jew means to lead an ethical life. But even the most secular Jews tend to have some connection with the Jewish community and to the Jewish calendar. So I'm going to take you on a quick pictogram here. This rolled up scroll is called the Torah, which is the written law handed down by God to Moses in Sinai. It's written in Hebrew, and this person is reading the Torah scroll, and it's read every Sabbath, and it's studied and studied and studied. That was called people of the book for a good reason. The Torah is the main book. And then their oral law happened, and rabbis discussed and figured out how to lead a daily life. How do Jews lead a daily life? And that has been compiled in book after book with rabbi after rabbi commenting on that. And those books are written in Hebrew or Aramaic and are studied constantly, especially in the Orthodox and the ultra-Orthodox traditions. So those books and those learnings are the central foundations for a religious person's observance. But like I said, even the most secular Jew will have some attachment, most likely, to the calendar. So we start with Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, happens around September or October. It's a time of asking for repentance and doing repentance. It's very different from the secular New Year, so it's a serious time. A time when people ask each other for forgiveness, ask God for forgiveness, and then pray for a sweet new year. The picture of the mother and daughter, they're lighting Sabbath candles, and every week, every Friday afternoon or evening actually, Sabbath candles are lit to usher in the Sabbath, which is a period of 25 hours of rest, and we rest because God rested after creating the world, and people define that rest differently. The more observant people are, the less work that they do on the Sabbath. The next picture is a picture of the challah bread, which is eaten on the Sabbath. It's specially baked for the Sabbath. A wine cup, we say prayers over wine and bread on Friday night and on Saturday afternoon. The next picture is a picture of a Seder, the observance around Passover. Most Jews participate in a Seder. It's considered a very large family event. It's held at the home. You see in the middle there's matzah, the unleavened bread, the 4 cups of wine that we drink, the Haggadah, which is the story of the Exodus from Egypt, which we celebrate, and the Seder plate. And most Jews will celebrate that. It's also a time, we know, when, because there's enormous tension in the family, it's a great preparation, and there's lots of family stuff going on, and there's also lots of preparation for this, when we can see rates of domestic violence spike a little bit because there's so much tension and it's such a controlling kind of an atmosphere in the home. And if things aren't done perfectly, or as the abuser wants them to be done, we know that domestic violence sometimes spikes around then. And the next picture is a picture of the menorah, which we light on Hanukkah. And that's another holiday that's celebrated even by secular Jews. They'll talk about Hanukkah, maybe exchange gifts with their children, and light some candles. So we have a unique calendar. It's a different calendar. Of course, we also go totally by the secular calendar, but this is our holiday calendar that informs many Jews' lives. So how many Jews are there? It's a little challenging to figure this out because it depends on who you ask. It's really not that clean cut. During biblical times, Jewish identity was determined by patrilineal descent, so it mattered who was your father. And then later on that was changed to matrilineal descent. It mattered who was your mother because it wasn't always easy to determine who the father was. And contemporary now, Orthodox and conservative, that's the most right-wing and the middle denomination, only recognize matrilineal descent. So if your mother is Jewish and your father is not Jewish, you are considered a Jew by the rabbis. The Reform movement, which is the more liberal wing of the denomination, and other rabbis who are more liberal often will recognize either matrilineal or patrilineal descent. So who is a Jew? It depends on who you ask. And people also want to say that, well, I'm a Jew culturally, but I'm not religiously. I don't really consider myself to be Jewish, although I have Jewish parents. So it kind of depends on who you're asking and why you're asking the question. But there are about 7 million Jews in the United States. Jew by religion is about 4.2. Jew not by religion, in other words, a secular Jew who just considers himself a Jew because my parents are Jewish, but I don't do anything to observe that. There's about 1 million of Jews like that, and Jewish children. So about 7 million, a very, very small percent of the United States population. The Jewish population is actually older and significantly older than other parts of the United States population. About 26% of Jews are 65 and older versus 19% nationally, and that's important also because we see elder abuse is on the rise in the Jewish community for obvious reasons. Jews are getting older, so there's more elder abuse. And I think it's also important to realize that, with aging, those, obviously there's bad health, there can be caregiver abuse, there can be increased poverty. I mean, all the vulnerabilities that happen with age are happening to the Jewish community. This is really interesting. 1 in 10 adult Jews, United States adult Jews, identify as non-white, and the majority of whom are Hispanic. And I think that that's interesting because I think most people don't realize that not all Jews are white. Jews come from many, many different kinds of backgrounds, ethnicities, countries, and that's something that can kind of expand your understanding of who is a Jew, what languages do Jews speak, and what are their the cultures that they're coming from. So about 86% of Jews in the United States now were born here, 22% of the adult children of immigrants. So their parents immigrated and the children grew up here probably. They probably immigrated themselves as children, probably from the former Soviet Union when a lot of immigrants came over, or Iran, Syria, Israel, and Latin America are the big places that people have been immigrating from, and 14% of the United States Jews living here are actually foreign-born. So there's many different languages being spoken. Russian, Ukrainian, Hebrew, Farsi, Arabic, Spanish, Portuguese are all languages, and English, of course, are all languages spoken by Jews. Jews tend to be urban, and 8 states have a population of over 200,000 Jews. So if you are, working in a rural area, you may literally never see a Jew because Jews tend to congregate in urban areas. So the states are New York, California, Florida, New Jersey, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and Maryland. And within those, there's cities that tend to be more Jewish than others. In Illinois, I'm talking Chicago. Pennsylvania, I'm talking Philadelphia. Florida, Miami. You can kind of figure out where the large urban areas are. That's where the Jews will be. Jews tend to be well educated. Over half are college graduates, and over a quarter of those are postgraduate degrees. The income is kind of interesting. I think there's kind of a myth that Jews are very well off or tend to do very well, and certainly, 25% with incomes over $150,000 is incredibly significant. But let's look at the other end of it. 20% of Jewish families have less than $30,000. So poverty and the challenges around poverty are significant for a significant number of Jews. And as I said, with an aging population, that is getting even to be more significant. I want to talk a little bit about the movements within the Jewish spectrum. So the Orthodox are think of them as the most right wing. And within the Orthodox, I myself am modern Orthodox, which means that I'm a Sabbath observer, I'm strictly kosher, I dress a certain way, my husband dresses a certain way, et cetera, et cetera. The Haredi or the ultra-Orthodox are the majority of the Orthodox community. And the ultra-Orthodox community have their own very special dynamics, ways of doing things, authority figures, and really their own unique communities. And 1 in 10 American Jews, so it's 10% of the American Jewish population is Orthodox, and of that, the 62% are ultra-Orthodox. 35% of American Jews are Reform, and that's the most liberal movement of the major movements, and about 18% are somewhere in the middle. So probably if a victim of survivor comes to you who is not Orthodox, he or she is going to be Reform or conservative, which means that her observance may or may not, her level of religious observance will be, may or may not be as strict or as important to her as it would be to an Orthodox Jew. So the Orthodox Jews are the most religiously observant, and we talked about the Seder. You can see most Jews participate in a Seder. Orthodox, conservative, Reform, everyone's doing it. Fast on Yom Kippur, which is our holiest day of the Year of Atonement, the Day of Atonement. Many people fast at least part of the day, and then what I'm saying here is even if people are not strictly observant, they'll still have fasted for part of the day. And interestingly, even those of no denomination will have fasted for part of the day, and even those of no denomination will have participated in a Seder. Lighting Sabbath candles, which is the introduction to the Sabbath every week, you can see by the numbers that the Orthodox are more likely to, and then scaling back depending on the denomination. But even those of no denomination are still sometimes lighting Sabbath candles. It's kind of a cultural thing. They may remember their mother or their grandmother doing it, and they want their kids to know that this is part of being a Jew. And then keeping kosher in the home, Orthodox, pretty much everybody, and then conservative and Reform, again, scaling back on that. In the left-hand corner, I put some of the symbols. I think being kosher is like what does this mean? So I'm just giving you some symbols. If you're ever in the grocery store and you want to look, is something kosher? These are the main symbols that identify to somebody if something is kosher or not. So just take a look at this. This is kosher dairy because there's a stricture against mixing meat and milk. So if I know this is a dairy, even though it doesn't have any, like it's a cookie, it's not like a glass of milk, I won't eat it when I'm eating a meat meal. So I need to know whether or not it has dairy ingredients in it. And those are the symbols that people who are kosher look for when they're shopping for groceries. So the community structure, I think that the Jewish community structure is one of its unique strengths, and it's also an incredible challenge to victims and survivors of domestic abuse. It's an incredibly highly organized community. This is a strength because there's so many linkages. There's so many ways to participate in the community. There's wonderful networking opportunities. There's wonderful ways to grow and share. And there's also a barrier because it's hard to escape. It's hard to be private. It's hard to be under the radar. And that can be a real challenge because somebody may not want to talk about being a victim of abuse, not want to talk about, not want to go and seek services because everybody's going to know. And that's one of the great challenges there. On the other hand, for somebody who is able to seek services within the community can be incredibly supportive. So I want to share with you what some of these community structures are. I think it will help you as you build relationships within your community to understand what the community looks like. So there's the Jewish Federation. The Jewish Federation, they're present in virtually every significant, in every significant Jewish community, and the smaller communities have some sort of community support network like a federation. But currently there are about 150 Jewish federations across the United States and Canada, and there's about 300 smaller communities with these federations. So what is a federation? It's a centralized charity, essentially, run by the local community. And in each community, the federation raises money from local sources and then funds a variety of local, national, international needs. And non-Jews are among the beneficiaries of federation-supported programs. Federations raise the money from the community for the community, and between 30 and 50% of Jewish households in the United States typically contribute to their local federation. So it's a huge number, a huge amount of support from the community for this community organization. About half of the funds raised by Federation are earmarked for local Jewish social services. The largest single allocation is to Jewish education, to the day schools, the yeshivas, and Hebrew schools that are present in that community. And then the Jewish community centers, those JCCs where people go to play basketball or to hang out or for programming or music, and that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And then the local Jewish family and child services, which are present in so many communities. And those are the places, the Jewish Family and Child Services organization may include a domestic violence program. So if some of the Jewish programs are independent programs, and many of them are housed within the Jewish Family and Child Services agency. Federation money also goes to the assisted living homes, the nursing homes, and the campus Hillels for Jewish college students. So it's an incredibly significant part of the community, and it keeps the community organized, and it lets the community know that if you think this program should be supported, you need to fund it. There are about 3,000 synagogues in the United States from all the different denominations, and many communities will have an Orthodox, Reform, a conservative synagogue, or two of each that you have someplace else to go to, and they vary in size. There's some very small ones with 20 people, and then there's the largest Reform synagogue in this country right now, I think has about 3,000 members. So they totally vary in size, but it's the place where people will go for their Sabbath services, their holiday services. They'll send their kids there for after school, what we call religious school, after school, Sunday school. All sorts of community events will happen at the synagogue. Synagogues tend to be very family-friendly, and they can be challenging for both the victim and the abuser because everybody, again, knows each other. You see each other on a weekly or monthly basis pretty much, or your kids go to Hebrew school and you see each other in the carpool line. So it's another place that people tend to mingle. And if a victim and her husband or her partner belong to that synagogue, the rabbi can be challenged on what do I do? What do I do if the abuser is the chairman of the board here and signing my contract? What do I do if the abuser is a really important member of the synagogue and I don't want to alienate him? How do I handle this? So it's a challenge that when we do training for rabbis, we talk about. We have to acknowledge that that's a really important challenge. And then the youth group system, it's incredible. There's national youth groups that kids belong to from all the different movements, and they tend to know everybody. There's one for the conservative movement, the Orthodox movement, the unaffiliated movement. There's a Reform movement. They have summer camps. They have weekly, monthly programmings. They have regional retreats. And I cannot tell you how many kids know each other from their youth groups, even if they aren't present in the same community. They just kind of know each other, and it's incredible. It's an incredible support system for the kids. It also means that people know who you are. Schools, there are religious schools, and there are what we call day schools, which are all day. Instead of going to public school, they'll go to a private school where half the day will be religious studies in Hebrew and other religious studies, and then other half the day will be secular studies. And those tend to also be small schools where people know each other, support each other, care about each other. Again, a strength and a barrier. If Jews are sending their kids to a summer camp, it's often a summer camp from one of the movements, another way to build up that kind of Jewish identity and Jewish continuity that people care about. And again, another way for people to feel included or not included and really frightened of being, frightened that if I come out as being a victim, my child will be ostracized within the summer camp, within the school, within the youth group. How can I do that to my child? And then Jews tend to live in certain neighborhoods, often around the area where the JCC or the synagogue is. If people are kosher, they tend to they'll live where there is kosher food available, and in the larger supermarkets. So the community itself will tend to live around each other, and that's good and that's bad. Family life. No surprise, marriage, children are really important elements of a Jewish home. Like any other home, children are critically important to a family, and there's a lot of pressure to get married, to have a relationship and to get married within the Jewish community. No matter, even the most secular weddings, even if it's an interfaith wedding, will traditionally have some element of a Jewish traditional wedding, whether it's the chuppah, the covering, or somebody's wearing a talit, or they break the glass at the end. There's some element of a Jewish wedding, and it's the cultural piece of it. One unique thing around a Jewish wedding is for the Orthodox and the conservative, and maybe even for others, is that the woman goes to the mikveh. It's a ritual pool of water, of running water, before she gets married. And then she repeats that every month after the cessation of her menstrual cycle. Because in the Orthodox community, couples do not have intercourse or any kind of physical relationship when she's menstruating. So she needs to go to schedule an appointment, go to the mikveh. There's a woman there who's observing her to be sure that she dunks in there properly, and then she goes home and has intercourse with her husband. You can see right away why that would be could be a source of abuse. Sometimes men will say, I want to have sex with you anyway, even though you're prohibited from me, spiritually and religiously, which can be a source of enormous pain to a woman. And she may really relish the time off from her husband, the 10 days or so when she's forbidden to him, and then really dread going to the mikveh and having sex with him that night. And the mikveh attendants, the women who work at the mikveh, are people who are trained, who have been trained by different domestic violence advocates on how to recognize and how to talk to the women around domestic abuse, because it's a place of great privacy, and it can be an incredible way to talk to women in private. Men are simply not present at the mikveh. What else? Male privilege. So again, within the more observant spectrum of the community, male privilege is rampant. What can I say? Rabbis, which are the authority figures, are men. Women have some roles in the synagogue, but not the role of the authority figure by any means. And here's what's called a Beit Din. It's a court of 3 rabbis who are determining the status of some Jewish issue, and no woman will ever sit on a Beit Din. Here's an ultra-Orthodox family. They tend not to use birth control, so they have more children than they might otherwise have. The woman is covering her hair with a sheitel. It's a wig that she uses for modesty reasons. No man will see her uncovered head once she's married. She won't wear a veil or a hat. She'll wear it's a wig, and you can tell because their wigs are gorgeous. And you know that a woman of 50 isn't usually walking around with such shiny, thick, beautiful, lush hair. So it's a wig, and so it's kind of easily identifiable. The man is wearing a black hat, which is one of the symbols of the more ultra-Orthodox community. And divorce. So I talked a little bit about male privilege. If a woman and man want to get divorced, or if she wants to get divorced, he has to offer her the divorce. It's called a get, and he has to give it to her. That gives him an enormous amount of power to withhold the get, and that's a form of domestic violence and domestic abuse that is unique to the community, to the Jewish community, specifically within the Orthodox community. Because if he doesn't give her the get, and they separate, she is left hanging. She's called a chained woman, an aguna. She cannot remarry. She is still married to him, although they are not living together, and they have had their civil divorce. So it's totally within his control, and it's a very difficult issue. In 2004, Jewish Women International did a needs assessment, a portrait of domestic abuse in the Jewish community. Obviously we couldn't survey the entire Jewish community, so we did it at one of our conferences. And then we did another needs assessment within Chicago, where there's a large Jewish community, and we were doing some important work there. And what we learned is that domestic abuse in the Jewish community has no boundaries, affects all relationships, socioeconomic classes, ages, spectrums of religious observance and cultural life. The range of behaviors is broad and includes what it does in every other community: sexual, verbal, psychological, and physical abuse, as well as financial abuse. And financial abuse is often present, but sometimes it's unseen. It's important to know that, because as an advocate, women who may present themselves as having resources and being able to move on or get her own new home or move from the community may actually lack all access to them, to those resources. And so it's something to look out for. And get refusal, which I just spoke about, which is denying the divorce, and having sex during nida, which is the time of separation because of the menstrual cycle, are unique to the Orthodox community. The needs assessment also found that Jewish women do not seek shelter services or other traditional domestic violence services, even those that are within the Jewish community. And so they need to figure out their services on their own. It's kind of a disconnected disjointed way of seeking help. But victims and survivors are more likely to seek help from their own network of friends and family, or even psychotherapists. Jews tend to be very therapist-friendly, than from any other source. And Jewish women will turn to their rabbis if the rabbi has spoken out about domestic violence or otherwise indicated that he or she can be a source of support. But going to the rabbi is not the natural first step. It's really turning to your friends and family. In 2011, we did another survey of the Jewish direct service organizations, and there's quite a few of them. I think there's about 75 of them right now. And we asked them who they were serving, and they were serving victims of domestic violence, victims of every form of this kind of violence, dating violence, of gender-based violence, stalking, sexual assault, immigrants, LGBTQ victims, disabled, and victims of trafficking. And not all their clients are Jewish. The Jewish domestic violence services are open to anybody in the community. So it doesn't mean that these were all Jewish victims, but that's who they're serving. And the programs and services that are offered by these Jewish domestic violence organizations are counseling and therapy, family counseling, legal referrals, on-staff lawyers, medical services, shelters, intervention, some batterers intervention, and services for children and victims of elder abuse. I think it's important for everyone to know about these Jewish domestic violence organizations, because if a victim comes to you and you feel like you can't support her, look in your community for the Jewish program and see if you can meet with those advocates and talk about some referrals. We asked the Jewish direct service organizations how important faith was to their clients, and faith was pretty important to about 25 to 50% of clients, by no means to every one of their clients. I think I had another slide here. No. The greatest area of unmet need for the victims of the Jewish direct service organizations were housing services, affordable legal services, financial services, and long-term counseling. Those were the areas of gap. The gap areas, again, I think similar to what everyone in the field is facing. So what are the barriers to seeking help? One of the biggest ones is a sense of shame or self-blame. There's a value we call shalom bayit. It's domestic harmony. It's on the woman to achieve domestic harmony within her home, and if she doesn't, she's the one to blame, as opposed to, we're a partnership and we're going to figure this out together and have a peaceful home. Her family certainly is going to be it can be a source of strength and help, or it can be something she doesn't want to expose her family to. If she has children, she'll probably stay longer in that relationship than otherwise. She may not have the resources to leave. She may be scared. She may very well be in denial. And part of that is the myth that domestic abuse doesn't happen in Jewish communities, but we know that it does, and we're breaking down that myth more and more so that people can't deny. They'll recognize they'll recognize the situation that they're in. And because so many women who will just rely on their personal networks and won't stay in shelters and won't seek out help from the domestic violence advocates that could really help them the most, they're unable to really to take advantage of the services that are available. Question is often asked, what about the abuser? And what about the role of repentance and forgiveness within the Jewish community? We have something called tshuva, which means literally to return. And on Rosh Hashanah and on Yom Kippur, it's the time when, as a community, we do tshuva together. We ask forgiveness of our spouse and our partners and our children and our parents, anybody that we may have insulted or injured unintentionally or even intentionally over the course of the year. And then we pray to God for that forgiveness. Well, an abuser has the opportunity to do tshuva, but it's a long process. He doesn't just get to say, I'm sorry, so sorry, that won't happen again. It's got to be really deep and really thoughtful. And the first step is regret, and regretting that it happened and telling the person that it will never happen again, stopping his behavior, confessing to the victim, survivor, to the community, to the family, to the congregation, what he did, and resolving to take steps that it will never happen again. And while that's important, there is no requirement that the survivor take him back. But the rabbi or the family might want to put pressure on her then to say, well, he did tshuva. He's really sorry. He stopped doing it, especially if there's children in that relationship. They might pressure her to say, you know what? He's changed. Let him back in your life. You're going to have be a whole family unit again. She may feel that pressure, and it's going to be real pressure, but it's always got to be her choice. And if you see a victim who's feeling that pressure, she has to understand that the authority comes from her and not from that rabbi and not from that family member. And she has to know that she has no obligation to take him back. So some of the challenges for advocates across the board are identifying abuse because women don't come forward and because they're going to try and hide actually what's happening to them, and they will not be necessarily self-identifying. It's hard to buck those community norms that a family lives together and you take care of your children, and the guy's a good guy and he's an important guy in the community, and we want to preserve that. Some people are very nervous because we talked about the networked community and how small the community is and how everybody knows each other, and they're very, very nervous about the impact on their children. If they're afraid to talk about, they don't want the repercussions to be on their children, so they're going to stick it out. They're just going to stick it out. And the cultural and religious values of the fear of people knowing that there's this kind of abuse happening, and the religious values of Shalom Bayit or of the need to preserve a family, or again, may play a very large role. And then there could be language barriers. We spoke a little bit about the many languages that Jews speak, and that can be difficult for advocates. And there's resources for those language barriers, obviously, and to avail yourself of those kind of resources. But it might not be as intuitive as you think. You might have problems communicating with the person because she speaks a language other than the one that your service agency provides. So very quickly, just share a couple of our resources. If you go to our website, we have many resources. We have Tools for Talking to Teens, which is a free downloadable program for adults on talking to teens around dating, abuse, and healthy relationships. It's a wonderful, wonderful program to bring to your community. Embracing Justice is a guide for Jewish clergy. This started out as a 200-page guide, and we've narrowed it down now to 12 pages, downloadable on the computer as a free PDF. And if you want to meet with a rabbi, you might want to download this and bring it to the rabbi or the cantor in your community and start, doing some training around that. And then we have a video where Jewish domestic violence survivors speak about their agony and their journey, and the community resources that help them in their journey to safety. And I think, yep. I'm going to conclude with that, and contact me with any questions. I'm always available for help. And I think we're going to turn now to questions.
Hi, Deborah. This is Alicia over here, and we did have a couple of questions come in through the chat box. Mary would like to know, could the man marry again even though the woman couldn't if he doesn't offer the divorce to her?
There's a way, yes, there's a way. It's a special provision, and if 100 rabbis sign some document that he can marry again, he can marry again. So it doesn't stop anybody from marrying again, which is why, there's really no pressure on him to give the get.
All right, thank you. We also have a question from Anne. Can rabbis play a role in encouraging a man to give his wife the get?
Yes, absolutely. They can play a role, and there's training around that, but they're not allowed to pressure him into giving it. He can't be pressured. It has to be of his own free will. So it's a tension around what does it mean to pressure, and that's a source of great discussion within the community. But there have been things done, like there've been rallies around outside of a man's house who has refused to give a get to embarrass him. There's been boycotts of his store or place of employment. There was a staffer on Capitol Hill was withholding his get, and it was a big article in the New York Times. It was kind of prominently featured, and people went up to the Hill and told his boss and kind of outed him in that way. So there's different ways to put community pressure on him, but that's about as much pressure as a rabbi can put on. The rabbi can certainly talk to him and explain why it's in his best interest to do that, but there's not much more that can be done legally, at least.
Okay, great, thank you. We did have a couple of more questions come in advance, so I'll give a couple minutes for people to add any more questions that they have to the chat box while we address the ones that came in advance. Can you speak more about the fact that most Jewish victims will not go to a shelter? Why is it that women who are not very religiously Jewish will not likely go to a shelter? And what are the ways that direct service advocates can help reach or bridge the gap with Jewish victims when they do come to the shelter? I know it's like 3 questions in one.
So I think that the reason that Jewish victims, women, don't go to shelters is because they're unsure of what a shelter is, who's living there, what are the services available, and will I feel comfortable there? Will my children and I feel comfortable in the shelter? And they probably think that they won't. But there's no reason why they couldn't. And so I think that if shelter services could if people can break down those barriers around that, there is certainly a resource that can be available to Jewish victims. There are shelters within the Jewish community, within the Jewish direct service programs. There are some shelter services, but again, I think people tend to feel more comfortable with their own family and their own network, and so that's where they're going to turn to first.
All right, great.
Is there another part to that question?
Just about bridging the gap between victims and shelter services.
I think sometimes it's a question of communication. So if there's some kind of public awareness that for Jewish victims we can provide kosher food, if that's an element of it, we can provide kosher food if that's important to you, that your children will feel at home here during the short duration that you need to live here, that it's a safe space, that you'll be able to get counseling, like just kind of letting people know what the services are, that could help bridge the gap. And I think that one of the ways to do it would be to meet with the rabbis and explain to them what the services are that are available, so that if a woman does turn to her rabbi or does turn to her friend within the community, that people understand what the shelter can offer. So it's a question of, getting to the rabbi and getting to the community at large through kind of public awareness.
Oh, I'm sorry, I muted myself. What are some strategies for direct service advocates to better work with Jewish community leaders on domestic violence?
Right. So I think that's a really important question. I think that one of the ways is to introduce yourself and to find the synagogue in your community and ask for a meeting with the rabbi and the clergy leaders or the lay leadership, and really make it a personal meeting where he or she will feel comfortable with you and will be able to make a referral, so that if somebody does come forward, they feel comfortable in making the referral to you. And I think it's got to be on a personal basis. I don't think it can be by the phone or email. The comfort level will just be much better. So I think it's as simple as that. I think it's really asking for that meeting and then talking about the work that you do and how you are going to assume that there are victims in that community who would benefit from your services.
All right, thank you so much. I do see a couple more people typing, so we're just going to give them 1 second. Anna and Tiana are wondering if any man can marry a woman when they start their period. For example, if a woman gets her period at the age of 9, can they get married at the age of 9, or is there a certain age for marriage separate from that?
Today, people don't get married at the age of 9 in the United States. They may get married as young as 16 or 17, but that really doesn't happen in the United States.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, those are the only questions that we really had, so we can turn it back over to Anne to wrap up and give people a couple more seconds to type in if they have any questions.
Okay, thank you. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Deborah. This was really fantastic, and I'm so grateful that you were able to provide all this really valuable information to us. I know I learned a lot. This is a list, the slide you see in front of you is a list of other webinars that we'll be providing on various topics, and we hope you all will join us for those. I want to invite you to join us for those. Deborah, thank you so much, and thanks also to Alicia and to NCJ, FCJ for their support. We're deeply grateful. So happy you all could join us, and thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.